Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In a Nick of Time. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes now with Victor joining us from Upbound to talk about what is going to disrupt the future of infrastructure as code. So stay tuned for another 5 minutes if you have questions. Victor is bringing a wealth of knowledge in DevSecOps and really how to streamline all the processes around DevOps for organizations to be more lean and reduce toil for developers and platform engineers. So stay tuned for another 5 minutes. We'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In a Nick of Time. We're very lucky today to have an amazing guest, Viktor, joining us. He's already a world-renowned expert in DevSecOps, DevOps, and he's going to help us understand what the future and what's going to disrupt the world of infrastructure as code. So it's going to be a very interesting, somewhat technical episode, but make sure you start. Engaging in the comment section below for your questions. We have already a lot of questions came from Twitter and LinkedIn. So start with a Q in the comment section below if you have a question for Viktor. As always, wanted to remind you to subscribe to the newsletter so you can get notified for the next episode at inanikoftime.tv. You'll get an email a week about the next guests, and next week we're going to be pretty lucky. You'll see that we have Dan Lawrence joining us from Chengard, who is also one of the founder of Minikube, of Sixto, and Distroless was at Google, and now the CEO of Chengard next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern. So that's going to be also a fun episode on debunking and going to really do a deep dive on software supply chain and what to pay attention to. So with that, you can miss also the next week episode, right? Um, Again, wanted to remind you, if you've not heard of GPT, I don't know where you've been, and you should be probably not allowed on this channel here, but if you have OpenAI, launched GPT a few months ago. We brought it for U.S. government use cases and contractors, but we also augmented it, right, by being able to ingest custom data by tapping into real-time APIs and by being able to really effectively have access to real-time query, right? Because GPT is stuck in time in 2021. So we have created personas, and we also integrated multiple models outside of GPT with Cohere and working with Google Bot as well. So we kind of the abstracted layer to ingest your data, which will work on any model and be able then to augment, human capacity, whether it's for coding, whether it's for writing things, whether it's for answering RFPs and bids, coming to conclusion in go no go flying decision for airmen. We've done a lot of pretty cool stuff. So go check it out on assay.ai. You can create an account completely free to play with it. So give us your feedback. Tell us what you think, what we could improve. Always welcome the feedback. We have 900 teams on Sage in only 5 weeks, which is pretty amazing. So pretty excited about that. So love your feedback. With that, well, wanted to welcome Viktor to the show. Viktor is the developer advocate at Upbound. Is of course a world-renowned DevOps expert. He has an amazing YouTube channel that, if you've not heard of it, go check it out, with the DevOps Toolkit. And of course, before his time at Upbound, he was also the developer advocate at ShipUp, and a member of the Google Developer Experts and Dr. Captain groups, and is an author as well. Big passions, of course, with what's new with DevOps, containers, Kubernetes microservices, and CI/CD and test-driven development. You can check out here on these links. You will see the DevOps Toolkit series on DevOps Toolkitseries.com, the DevOps Paradox, the book on Amazon here, test-driven Java development on Amazon as well. And you can follow his blog as well on technologyconversations.com. And he's a co-host of a great show, also a podcast, DevOpsParadox.com. So with that, you're gonna welcome for me, Viktor. Welcome. So excited
Hey,
to have you.
thank you for
We're
having
lucky
me.
because you bring a wealth of knowledge, and you also are very good at explaining things. So even people like me can keep up with what you're saying. I'm a subscriber of your YouTube channel. I've been following you for many years, and you've bringing a ton of content. And I'm always, if there's one DevOps channel I keep up with, there's a lot of CNCF stuff, but they're kind of always selling stuff, right? They're always, I mean, it's always companies behind the scene, right, pushing the levers of the video selection, right? But in your case, I feel like you're not doing that, and you're doing a very good job at bringing different topics and covering different subjects. And we're very lucky to have you. Before we get started, I always, tell my guests to share a little bit about their journey. I love to hear what you've been up to and what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, so who am I? So I'm a lazy software engineer, first and foremost. Lazy part is important because by being lazy meant that I had to automate myself out of the work so that I can spend not doing the things that I was supposed to do and do something else. I did almost all the roles that you can imagine, being a developer, being a tester, being a tech lead, being a manager, being everything, right? For a while now, I feel like, hey, so many people helped me when I was young and inexperienced and things like that. Now it's my turn to give back. That's why a significant part of my time is spent simply on helping communities, right? Without any real hidden motives or anything like that kind of. And I'm lucky that I work in companies for a while now that are willing to support that, right? Not that much benefiting the company, but more benefiting others in a way.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Obviously some companies are pretty broad adoption of open source, right? So you're going to find that kind of mindset, of course, with open source tied companies. Not always, but often that's going to make a lot of sense for them to also have someone like you. And that leads me to my first question, right? A lot of people had the question, right? What is a developer advocate anyway? Is it just a fancy way of saying you're a glorified sales guy selling what the company wants you to sell, or is it a different role?
The answer to that question is depends, right?
Depends on the company.
Exactly. I normally I divide that role in practice, not in theory. We can talk about that as well. Is whether the role belongs to the marketing department or engineering group, right?
Ah, interesting.
I tend to, and huge respect for both, right? We need marketing because we need to sell and because so that I can get my salary, right? So that's a fair game.
For you otherwise, right? You're expensive.
Exactly. So. But I tend to, that's one of the first questions I have whenever I speak with the company about potentially joining. Hey, is this role here or there, right? And right. I continue that conversation only if it belongs to engineering department, right? Engineering product, technical part. So in some companies, that is a extension of marketing, right? Leads collection in a way, right? In other companies, like where I tend to be, is more indirect benefit, right? If you're truthful and you know what you're doing and you help people and so on and so forth, they will associate you with the company you work in. And through that association and the work that you do, we will get some benefit, right? Either brand recognition or something like that, right? And then there is a third component that I always join a company after I fall in love in what they do, right? So for me, it's not the job. Hey, I need a job, right?
You ship I saw the video. You were getting excited about the video, the product, and then you joined the company, right?
Yes, that part is a bit specific. It was short-lived. Because sometimes things change.
Happens.
Exactly, but yes, I've always first look whether this has potential, whether this is something that I would be using heavily, independently of whether I'm working there or not.
Yeah, and so I guess if you have to describe the role, of course, you're helping people regardless of the desire of using the product, but there's obviously. Do they tell you what to say and not to say on your show? I mean, do they care about, what you talk about?
No. So in my specific case, the second question would be, in that interview, hypothetical, right, would be, hey, I have my stuff that I do, like DevOps Toolkit and DevOps Paradox, and there are things that I do for a company, right? My stuff lives in parallel and is uninfluenced by the company. Even though I might be spending, I spend sometimes almost always weekends working on my stuff, but sometimes during the working hours, right? And company benefit indirectly through that, but there is that clear separation. Actually, as a matter of fact, you will rarely hear word crossplane in DevOps Toolkit channel since I joined Upbound. I created a ton of material about it before I joined. And when I joined, I actually lowered down to close to zero, precisely because for me, it's more important that people trust me than anything else. And company benefits from that. Just to clarify, it's not that they're giving me money, monthly salary for nothing, right? They benefit, but not by me selling something, right?
Yeah, it's not as direct as a sales guy, right? But it's indirect, and it's long-term investments too, and it's it's also culture and kind of branding. So it's always a little bit less. It's more difficult to really put a value to it, I guess. So not every company does that, right? So how common is it in companies nowadays?
I would say that it's less common than being extension of marketing. Let's put it that way, right? Without putting numbers.
Yeah, and they have to be big enough too, right? It's usually not a very small company. They have to be big enough to afford it.
Depends how you define big. Like where I'm,
how big is,
like where I'm right now, we're talking about
now?
65, give or take. So relatively small. I mean, it can be smaller, right? But not really significant
small,
size.
It's not big. Yeah.
I mean, actually,
4 million people in DoD, that's for sure. Right. So.
When I spoke with Upbound before I joined about potentially me joining, actually, one of the sales guys said, "Hey, I need to join this meeting because actually, you landed our first customer, right?" I never sold anything. I was just passionate about crossplane, and people adopt it. And then they contact our sales, or our sales discovers them and stuff like that, and then balls start rolling. So there is that benefit, just not direct.
We'll talk about it, but Crossplane is the open source version of all the open source product, and Upbound is the company around it and kind of commercializing the product. But we'll talk about that too. So, so that's kind of what the developer advocate is. Is it really focused on developers, or you end up talking also to managers and kind of leaders? What do you find?
Yes. So I tend to go more towards, or people tend to come to me more often when they're in more senior positions. When I say senior, not only CEOs listen to me. Definitely not, right? But senior engineers and then above, right? Including CTOs, technical people.
So it's not
usually.
Technically, so it's a little bit broader than developer advocate. I guess you're like the product advocate or something.
Yes, I mean I do stuff and then something useful comes out of that. I don't even know what I do anymore.
You're just you. That's what you do. That's good. So tell us a little bit about what control plane. First, let's go back to the basics, right? For the audience, I mean, they understand Kubernetes, they understand orchestration. They probably see Kubernetes as an orchestration stack, right? Most people don't realize the importance of course, the data plane. I mean, the data plane, we get it. The control plane of Kubernetes, the API and how you can orchestrate not just basic things, but pretty complex workload, including what could be disrupting effectively the entire infrastructure and platform work and setting up very complex stacks. So how do you explain to people what is a control plane?
Control plane is a replacement for humans in a way, or partly replacement for humans, right? It's a mechanism, typically a cluster, right, that manages your resources, right? So, and usually that management goes through the contracts between the desired state and the actual state. And sounds like it's not a big difference, but actually that's what changed the industry drastically not long ago, right? That we are not imperatively saying, or even executing commands and saying, hey, I want to do this. I want this to happen, and all those things. We are effectively providing control plane with the desired state, saying, hey, I want this to exist in this form. Go figure it out.
You tell what you want, and the system will figure out how to get you there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I show you a recipe of a cooked meal, and you figure out how to make it. That's
Right.
not my problem, right?
The ingredient is not
And
your problem. Yeah. How you get there is not the user problem.
exactly. And that's how we got Kubernetes. I mean, Kubernetes was not the first one, just to clarify. We had, to begin with, every single cloud provider right now has a control plane. We don't see it, right? But it's happening behind the scenes. You go to AWS, let's say, and you say, I want a VM with 4 gigs of RAM and 2 CPUs, whatever the requirements are. That's my desired state. And then things automatically happen. What is happening behind the scenes, behind that request in the API, is a ton of processes that are going to figure out, okay, so where do I have available space for that VM? What should I do? How I should do it? And so on and so forth, right? And then besides fulfilling your desire, right? It's a contract, meaning it's not that only I want to have that VM. I want to have that VM forever and ever. If it goes down, you need to recreate it, right? If it changes, you need to undo the changes. You need to do whatever it takes for that state to be always there.
Right.
Now, when Kubernetes appeared, and solutions before Kubernetes as well, but especially Kubernetes, it started with that in mind. And the first implementation of that idea were containers, right? So we got a control plane that makes sure that your applications packaged as container images are always running. They're there, and there are a bunch of processes like, hey, scale when this happens, do this when that happens, and so on and so forth. Now, what many people I feel are missing is that because the first contact for 99% of the people with Kubernetes is containers, there is that perception that Kubernetes is a thingy that runs my applications as containers. But it's not. That's just one of many implementations. The key there really is that it is a control plane, extensible API, so that any vendor or you as individual or you as company, you can extend it and make it be a control plane of whatever you need it to be, right? So it's not a ready-to-go product. It's something on top of which you can create a product.
Right. Interesting. And that's where you see, people creating controllers and using custom resource definitions to create custom objects that effectively, become part of the structure of Kubernetes that gets orchestrated. And you see Kubernetes operators and people obviously know Helm, but Helm is not as powerful as an operator in a day 1 and day 2 update, right? And keeping up with the state. And so Kubernetes will do the job with the control plane, right? To enforce that state. And now with GitOps, right? We'll talk about GitOps too, but GitOps is kind of, okay, we're going to store that desired state in Git, right? And that is then enforced, right, by things like Flux or Argo to really ensure that the Kubernetes cluster is always comparing the current state and the desired state in Git and always deconflicting and making it happen. And that is a very powerful orchestration stack. For me, I did a video on why I think Kubernetes is a must, even if you think it's overkill, because of some of these benefits, but also because of the cyber enforcement, right? The admission controller stuff we can do, right? There's a lot of things, right, you can do to effectively streamline your orchestration and your enforcement and your cyber visibility, your logs, your telemetry, right? How do you feel about people that like me that are saying, hey, we should really, as a particularly for the government where we have very complex systems and a lot of different teams, trying to normalize workload under Kubernetes with the right structure, the right cyber stack, the right enforcement. Did you see this as a great benefit for cybersecurity?
Oh yeah. First of all, because almost all the new solutions are built on top of Kubernetes first, and then if you're lucky, things happen somewhere else. That's the state of the industry right now. So first of all, you would be missing a lot of things. And then you mentioned yourself GitOps, which, by the way, works only and exclusively in Kubernetes. There is no solution, GitOps solution, and I can fight anybody about that outside. Now, what GitOps gives us is the pull model, which makes it infinitely more secure.
Very most.
Right?
That was mandated. I mandated that in DoD, right? And for people that don't understand, right, the CI/CD usually pushes in prod, so it has the keys to a kingdom in prod, right? Versus just the pull method where you don't need the keys of production, right? In your CI/CD pipeline, you pull from Git every minute or whatever, right? And so much more secure, right?
Exactly. If CI/CD pipelines or Joe or whomever else can access your cluster, then somebody else can access it as well, right? The most secure way is to say nobody can access it.
Nobody,
right?
Just a pull, and it's nothing. Effectively, you could almost disable ports and SSH and everything else. It's just pulling and applying the desired state. People cheat that, right? There's very few companies that are mature enough to go that level of maturity, right? To really say we're gonna have no human in production, right? But so, that's a desired goal, right?
That's the desired goal mostly, right? You do need to have a direct access to the cluster in case of break glass situation, right?
Right.
Things go completely south, nothing works, and then there is a person or a few people who can access it and figure out what's going on.
Accounts, not like the Uber nonsense, though, right? I did a video on that too, where they messed up pretty bad on the break glass account. So
so you need that
pretty tightly controlled, right? Yeah.
Exactly. It's in a safe, the traditional safe with digits over there.
Safe, right? Yeah, not on the repo, that anybody can see, right? That would be pretty bad.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so that's the control plane, right? And so when you look at some of the cross-plane and Upbound, vision, right? They're talking about what is a modern cloud native alternative to infrastructure as code, right? And so is that what it is? Is that what crossplane does? You're creating a bunch of CLDs and you're running effectively infrastructure on top of Kubernetes and orchestrating it that way. What is it?
Yeah, so that would be crossplane and other tools, right? I'm not sure whether I think that slowly this industry will getting to the next iteration of naming and calling it control plane instead of infrastructure as code, just as infrastructure as code was a rename from configuration management. I know that they're not the same, but that's evolution in a way.
Yeah, it's evolution.
But nevertheless,
you always find fancy names, right? So always cool names.
Yeah, but it is going to have to be Kubernetes for a simple reason that Kubernetes itself provides certain benefits that when you're outside Kubernetes, you don't get, right? Like, hey, if you and me start designing a new solution right now, right? We would have certain requirements that we didn't have necessarily like 10 years ago. Like that solution needs to have an API, right? Where is the API? Kube API, perfect candidate, right? It needs to be extensible so that I can keep adding the types of resources that I manage. Again, that's what Kubernetes gives you. It needs to have the capability to detect the drift, the differences between what I want and what something is. Again, Kubernetes has it, right? And so on and so forth. So it is designed with all those things in mind, Kubernetes as well. And it would be almost silly to say, I'm going to start from scratch today, design the solution that requires extensible API, that requires drift detection, reconciliation, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to ignore all that and start from scratch. And you can see that that's the right direction by looking at what right now other companies are working on. And if you pay close attention to what Google is working on, to what AWS is working on, Azure, VMware, and so on and so forth, they're all going in that direction. How can we keep extending Kubernetes with additional resources so that we can use those resources through controllers to manage something, whatever that something is. It could be Git repositories, it could be AWS EC2 instances, Google something, on-prem, doesn't matter what it is, right? So that's almost a guaranteed future. Now, I'm not saying, keep in mind that, hey, Crossplane is a guaranteed future. I mean, of course, I believe in it, and I wouldn't be there if I wouldn't. But Kubernetes being extended to manage resources of any kind, that is happening, and that's almost certain for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so effectively, you end up having custom objects in Kubernetes to use the extension of the API to then orchestrate resources outside of Kubernetes as well, and instead of writing a bunch of Terraform, charts or whatever, you end up, back to YAML and just orchestrating it in a Git repo in a GitOps fashion. Is that kind of what Crossplane would bring to the table as well?
So that's one out of two major parts that Crossplane brings to the table, except that I wouldn't say, and then you're orchestrating it as a human, right? Because that's that conceptual difference. I'm not orchestrating anything. I'm not executing command Terraform apply, and then something happens, and then Terraform apply, and in between those two, nothing is happening, and so on and so forth. I'm signing a contract. Whenever I say defined in YAML, or you can use many other formats, right? Like there is YTT, there is CDKs, and so on and so forth. Anyways, I define what I want. I give it to Kubernetes, and Kubernetes make sure that something is happening and continues happening all the time. And through Crossplane, what we're getting is when you install a provider, let's say AWS provider, you get one-to-one matching between Kubernetes resources and resources in AWS. So there is a Kubernetes resource called EC2, right? Or EKS, or RDS, and so on and so forth.
You will see the priority, you will see the runtime will be matching, yeah.
And then you go to Kubernetes after you install, let's say, AWS provider, but it applies to everything. You say, hey, I want EC2 instance with those qualities, figure it out. Right? Not my problem anymore. You are managing from now on how that is done, when it is done, whether it still keeps happening, and so on and so forth. And then there is
is the apply is the equivalent to the Terraform apply now, effectively committing your code to Git and merging it into some branches? How do you trigger it? You have to say that.
So Terraform apply in Crossplane terms is equivalent to kubectl apply, right? Or Helm install, or whichever. Exactly. Except that difference, right? That Terraform apply is a one-shot action. It's happening only when I say that, and nothing is happening afterwards. And this is continuous, right?
Right. So it's keeping. It's enforcing it, right? It's a continuous monitoring enforcement thing.
Exactly.
Right. That's a and for cyber, right? One would argue not having shadow IT and having a well understood desired state of your stack is a key aspect of cybersecurity.
Exactly. And then there is a second part, and now coming back to custom resource definitions. I mean, Crossplane providers give you custom resources, but then comes the part that majority of people, when they use Crossplane, they do not say, hey, give me a EC2 instance, give me subnet, VPC, or whatever you might be needing. They create their own definitions and say, hey, to have a database in my context, in my company means this. And then behind the scenes, exactly, you're creating your own abstraction that has a meaning to you. When I say you,
the organization,
company, exactly. And then you have that clear separation between consumers and authors or designers of something, right? So traditional ops.
It's a Postgres database. It's just they need to know it's a database. Yeah.
Exactly, because hey, I as a developer, what do I know about Postgres? I know that I want a big database or small database and a few other things, but all the nitty-gritty details that somebody who is a DBA spent years figuring out, I don't know those things, right? But I do not want to open a ticket to that DBA and say, hey, give me a database. That DBA is proactively now creating a service and saying, hey, in my company, this is what database means. 5 fields, 10, whatever it means. You can self-serve yourself. So, and we call that feature Crossplane compositions. So it enables people not to use Crossplane directly, even though they could, but it enables companies to define services that will be served to everybody else in a company, and say, because if you look at Kubernetes, there is no such thing as application. Doesn't exist application as a context, right? You have a service, egress, virtual service, deployment, stateful set, building blocks. There is no solution. You need to build it or go to third party. Same thing, if you think about it in, let's say, AWS, right? There is no such thing as a Kubernetes cluster in AWS. You have EKS, yes, but then you need a node group, and you need a VPC, of course, and a subnet, an internet gateway, and so on and so forth. And that's good. That's actually a good design because it provides flexibility for us to fine-tune the solution in AWS. And the same thing applies to others, to what we need. However, the problem with the ability to use Kubernetes directly, or AWS, or Azure, so on and so forth, with those building blocks, is that if you're not an expert in that something, you cannot use it. It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Hey, I want a database, and now you're telling me that I need to figure out VPCs and subnets. Kind of, what the heck is going on there, right? And that's where Crossplane comes in and allows you to define what something means and provide that as a service instead of responding to others whenever they need something. Especially since that reactive approach does not scale, right? If you have one DBA for 20 people working in a company, I'm throwing random numbers, what happens when you have 200 people? 10 DBAs? 2,000 people? 100 DBAs? Does not scale.
Right. Do you see also people, so like for my company, right, with Sage, we have, 6 it's pretty lightweight, 6 containers, ingresses, Nginx, whatever, right? Do you see people, so we have a hub chart, right? But we could have done also with Kubernetes, customized or whatever, but do you see people also potentially using kind of this concept of composition to create an object to say, hey, I want to deploy Sage, and here's a turnkey thing, or people will stick to Helm and customize for that?
Yeah, so I'm going to ignore for a second Crossplane, right? We see that evolution all around in Kubernetes. Like in the past, you would have a Postgres Helm chart, right? That you download, you modify some values, and off you go, right? What is happening, and I'm using Postgres just as an example, today you will most likely go with an operator from this company or that project, whichever it is, that would, instead of giving you a Helm chart with 57 different files, it gives you a single CRD and say, create resources on this. Everything you need is here, and all the details are living in a cluster.
Right.
So it's almost like moving the templates part of Helm into the cluster and being left only with values and trusting the cluster to know what to do with those values instead of figuring it out from the client side.
It used to be a bunch of environment variables or whatever settings, right? They end up in the YAML of that object, right?
Exactly.
But would people use Crossplane, right, to now do that management of that kind of app?
Yes.
It's not just for infrastructure databases and stuff, right? It's also for like your actual microservices and your actual workload.
Because
right.
compositions really, Crossplane providers give you those resources that match something like in AWS or whatever that something is. But Crossplane compositions are really not directly coupled with Crossplane providers, right? Compositions are a way to say, hey, when you say this, I need to create and manage X amount of resources in Kubernetes. Now, whether those resources happen to be coming from Crossplane itself, like EC2 instances, or they're just Kubernetes resources like ingress, does not really matter that much from composition perspective. Composition is a way,
there's an option.
Exactly, to create a tree-like structure of things that should be happening in Kubernetes. So yes, doesn't have to be always Crossplane resources.
And so I assume you bring turnkey templates for things like EKS, right? Like you said, VNet and all that stuff. I assume you guys as a company are all bringing some easy button, right? Easy YAML template to turn that into all these objects behind the scene.
Yes and no. By design is yes and no, meaning that we want to make it easy for people, but more from the perspective to get them started than to be final solution. So if we have something like marketplace where Upbound or individuals or other companies contribute what we call configurations or compositions. But the whole idea is to enable you to build a solution that works for you. And using somebody else's solution as a starting point is great, right? But not necessarily the end solution, because we already have Heroku.
Tweak it, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Third-party opinionated solutions are great, right? And I always recommend, don't go to Crossplane or any other similar solution if what works out of the box is exactly what you need, right? Use Heroku. It's absolutely great. But when you get from this fulfills 100% of my needs to any number lower than that, then we are talking about the ability to customize the solution to fit your needs. And that's where we enter with compositions.
Do you find it to be a maturity thing? So usually, people getting started, they're going to get away with the opinionated stacks and maybe, some existing basics templates, but then they learn, they improve, and then they're going to want to become themselves more opinionated and tweak stuff. And so that's where opinionated stacks become a problem, I guess.
Yes, it goes with size and maturity. It was very common, including myself, like in the past. Hey, we start with Heroku because I'm a company that has 5 people. And with 5 people, I'm not going to have dedicated DBA and dedicated this or dedicated that, right? Those solutions were great. And then your
can you tell
needs
for people
change.
That don't know what, can you tell for people that don't know what Heroku is, what it does, quick?
Yeah, so Heroku is what we usually use as an example of a solution that was very successful, that provide very opinionated way to, in this case, manage applications. So I'm not sure when it went live, probably some 10 years ago or more, maybe 15. Right. Anyways, it allowed us to say, hey, this is the code of my application, run it. I do not know about servers. I do not even, that was before containers. It was actually running containers in some form behind the scenes. We did not even know about containers. It simply literally was, here's the code. That's all I'm going to tell you. Run it. Figure out infrastructure. Figure out everything that is required to run that code. It was almost a holy grail, and it still is, in a way. The issue with...
2007. So it's
2007.
2007. Yeah. So a long time.
That would be, long time ago. Almost 15 years.
Yeah, 16.
Yeah. And we got a lot of new services.
It wasn't designed around Kubernetes, right? Just to clarify. It could run.
There was no Kubernetes at that time.
Right.
I think that was...
It can run on Kubernetes now, right? Or am I mistaken? I think there is a container or something.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm not sure anymore because I'm not following it for a few years now, but at least back then it was before Kubernetes. And I cannot guarantee this, but I think it was before Docker even.
No doubt. Yeah, and they started, they had Heroku, Redis, and Postgres, and, all these different module stuff,
Yeah. And
so more like opinionated and less customizable and it's not Kubernetes native.
Exactly.
Does it have this notion of desired state?
No, not really, because there is no state to manage. Really, it's just my code, right? I couldn't really tell Heroku much. There were some tweaks that I could do, but not much in terms of what I really want. It was more like, hey, here's the code, run it.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess, when you look at what you guys bring to the table, right? How do you enable teams to be opinionated about their platform's decision, right? They're mature enough, they're big enough, they have special needs. I guess, is it that, you provide the templates and then you let them effectively do whatever they need to do, whether it's new objects or whether it's customizing the templates, right?
Though I partly spoke about it. That's the part about compositions, which is a mechanism in Crossplane to define a new interface, whatever that. It's completely up to you to define what that new interface is, and what to do after somebody creates a resource based on that new interface, new custom resource definition, which can get complex because, to begin with, it enables you to list, I want, when you say this, I want this, this, and that. And then the relations between those things. But, create a database, and then when the database is created, store the authentication to the database to the secret. And then when that secret with authentication is there, then get that authentication to go to the database and create a user, right? I'm now spitballing an example here, right? And we do that complexity in a unusual way, very declaratively. So there are no instructions like do this when that, but through the relations between objects, all those things are happening. And then that's how, at least those using Crossplane, provide a service, right? That interface that somebody can use and say, okay, give me a database.
Who would you say is a competitor to Crossplane? What else is there? A real, not a half-baked one, a real competitor that's doing the design state and the APIs, the Kubernetes API stuff, and who else is doing that?
So who else is doing that is kind of different than competitors. So who else is doing that? That would be actually 4 entities that comes to my mind right away. One would be Cluster API, which is a project in CNCF that allows you to define through Kubernetes resources a Kubernetes cluster. So you would have that one control plane cluster that would be spinning up other clusters through the instructions you send to it. And it has actually very, very wide support of what it can do. But it is conceptually similar to Crossplane providers, but limited by design to Kubernetes only, right?
Cluster.
So no databases or lambdas or whatever else, just a cluster, right?
Right.
And then AWS, Google, and Azure are all having their projects in certain level of maturity, and some not fully public yet.
It's not the same. It's not the same project. It's different projects, or they're working together. Just to clarify.
No, different projects. So they all work on their own variations of how we can manage their own APIs or communicate with their own services through Kubernetes. Google, for example, is called Cloud Connect, and AWS and Azure have them as well. So, but neither of those two are. So that's answering your question. Who is doing something similar?
To the CSP. Yeah, so it's not the same value for the customer.
Exactly. One cluster API is limited to Kubernetes, while other 3 are focused only on themselves in a way, right? So not real competition.
Interesting. And I guess, do you see the rest of the competition that's not doing the same stuff would be the traditional, I guess the Heroku, the Terraform of the world?
Terraform, Pulumi, Ansible, that would be the direct competition. Not necessarily in terms of what they...
Legacy.
Say again?
The legacy.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I would call it legacy, but they're not really doing what Crossplane is doing, but they are typically the types of tools from which people would migrate to Crossplane, so hence competition, right?
They're coming from there, yeah. So you asked, did you have to build converters or something to convert Ansible and Terraform stuff into Crossplane?
We were spitballing that idea for quite a while. and I cannot say
It's
impossible, but
painful.
close to impossible,
It's
because
painful.
conceptually it's very different, right? So because you're not anymore managing individual resources grouped into projects, you're creating services effectively, right? What we call compositions. So it's not one-to-one matching, just different syntax. It's
Right.
conceptually different how it's used, and it would be very, very difficult to. We could actually create some kind of conversion, but the result wouldn't be what you would expect.
Yeah, well,
Wouldn't
right.
wouldn't really provide the benefits of crossplane.
That's interesting. So, we talk about opinionated, right? And obviously DevOps is shiny. A lot of people get excited about Kubernetes, and you see a lot of development teams forgetting they have to build software and instead focus on the shiny, cool Kubernetes stuff, right? They get excited about all these fancy tools and all the pipeline stuff. And we've seen it in DoD where, there's so much vacuum going on. And, we created this central platform team called Platform One to be able to consolidate, all this platform engineering work, which is complex and painful and takes very special skills, and particularly when you had the cyber piece of it, which most people forget about. So, at what point do people really need to be opinionated about their platform, or should they just get used to using turnkey stacks like OpenShift or Rancher or whatever?
In a way, both. At least that's what I feel.
Yeah.
Because tools that you mentioned, like OpenShift, Rancher, right? They're great tools. They're somehow opinionated or not, but they're focused on very specific personas, right? Rancher, for example, is for somebody who lives and breathes Kubernetes. I'm a Kubernetes expert. I want to manage Kubernetes. Rancher, great. Where we are going is a different direction, right? It's rather how can that person create something, a service for somebody to consume who is not necessarily on the same level of expertise, because I cannot effectively give my tools to everybody else and say, you know what, I spent 7 years with this tool, use it. Doesn't work, right?
Right.
So below crossplane, you can have, just as you can have GKE in Google or EKS in AWS, you can have Rancher or OpenShift or this or that, right? So it's a layer that sits on top of ops tools. And I'm generalizing now. When I say ops, I mean, both security and sysadmins and whomever is not working on application development, right? It's almost a way how to take those, a number of platforms and tools and so on and so forth, and instead of giving 100 of them to everybody else and say, hey, now use OpenShift and Rancher and this and that, you're actually creating that layer and saying, here it is, right? This is a platform for you. And behind the scenes, there will be a bit of Google, a bit of AWS, a bit of Rancher, a bit of RDS, a bit of whatever it is. It's a way to create a single interface that serves myriad of tools that you're familiar with, but the rest not.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess, the follow-up question to that is, at what point is it just ego? Sometimes you have, a couple of tools as options, right? And if you go with something like OpenShift, very opinionated, probably the most opinionated stack on the planet, in my opinion. And so, sometimes developers, like something just because they like it, right? And they have a tough time explaining why, right? It's just a personal preference or whatnot, right? But then they're going to justify that personal preference as a reason for the leadership to say, well, we can't use OpenShift because it doesn't have my fancy tool, despite the fact that it's not that fancy and it's just my personal preference. So how do you balance, as a leader, right? If you advise, CIOs and stuff, right? I've seen it where, people would come with a fancy tool and I'm like, well, we don't have that one, but we have this one. Is that good enough? And they're like, well, I like this other one. but I'm like, okay, but what's missing, right? What feature don't you have? And at what point do you push back and be like, okay, we can't support every tool on the planet, so you're gonna have to stick to these 5.
I see it differently from a maybe deeper level. I'm a huge proponent of, let's call it self-sufficient teams, meaning that this is your project, this is your application. You're 100% responsible for it from beginning to the end. And the only way for you to have that responsibility is to have a freedom of choice. Meaning, hey, if you want to run it, a new application in mainframe, go ahead, do it, right? But you're responsible for it, right? You cannot come to me later on and say, hey, this doesn't work, right? And a hypothetical I'm a, let's say, ops person, right? I'm a service provider. I can give you access to OpenShift cluster, right? And that's my responsibility. I make sure that fulfill certain SLAs. Use it if you want to. If no, you can go to mainframe. You can go to Lambda, right? Because that's your responsibility. Uptime of your application, and my responsibility is some other service, right? We all should have responsibility for maintenance, development, and what's not of a service. And we all have a customer. And I think that this is a very important thing. We cannot have a team without a customer. Now, for you, a customer might be external user, right? A person who you're developing ATM software and person who goes to ATM to get money. That's your customer, right? Or it could be development teams in my company. That can be my customers. But if I really treat them as a customer, I cannot force my customers to use my product. I need to win them, right? That's the only way how I will do my job ultimately well. Because if somebody in a company says, everybody is forced and has to use from today on everything that Viktor builds, then I don't have a strong incentive to do well, right? But if I say, hey, Viktor offers this, use it or don't, go somewhere else. You're still responsible, so you have a responsibility and you need to fulfill it, so go ahead, right? The problems we have in many companies is that there is no that responsibility. If you look more traditional companies and say, okay, so there is a team that writes code, and there is a team that tests, and there is a team that does infrastructure, and there is a team that deploys, and there is a team that makes sure security. Who's responsible for that product?
Yeah. Right.
Nobody, right? Nobody has incentive to look beyond a tiny shoebox they're in, right? Nobody understands what's really happening. You see only a tiny part of it, right? So I think that AWS coined it first with 2 pizza teams,
Right.
a team that can be fed by 2 pizzas, but many others are adopting it. And ultimately, now, many companies cannot get there. Many others can get there, but it takes a lot of time, right? But ultimately, I feel that that's where we are really going. And then the questions start being slightly different, right? What is the service that you're offering and you're responsible for it from beginning to the end, and who is your customer? And if that service is, I make sure that OpenShift is running, use it or don't.
Right. That's very interesting. So, obviously the SLAs will drive that, and I agree with you, but I have exceptions.
Okay.
So the way I think about it is, there are a few services in an enterprise for cyber reasons that need to be coordinated. For example, identity management, or for example, zero trust policy enforcement point, or getting all my logs and my telemetry into some type of a SIEM to get enterprise-wide visibility of what's happening on my network. How do you think of these services?
I agree with that completely, right? I think that when I probably didn't explain well, when I said you're responsible, I mean you're responsible and those are the requirements. Like, hey, your logs
So there are
need to be
requirements
shipped
with it.
in a...
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
Right.
so it's not you're responsible. You can do whatever you want. I'm not telling you how to do it, but there are certain requirements. It needs to scale to a certain number of users. It needs to ship logs to a central location from where we can debug issues and so on and so forth. So there are certain requirements. Or it needs to be secure. It cannot expose ports, or it cannot.
Right.
It needs to have mutual TLS between applications and so on and so
Identity
forth.
management
Right?
and all that stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, there are other teams that can help you with that. So I don't expect any single person to know all that. Not at all, right? There are other teams that will help you with that. But asking for help from somebody is not the same as holding them responsible for...
No, I get it.
For your
would
stuff,
you see,
right?
would you see the identity team, right? Let's say there's a team providing, JSON Web Token, right, for P and NP, authentication. Do you see that team? I mean, for me, it would be a mandated team. You don't have a choice. So effectively, that team would have less incentive to make a good product because it's true that they're mandated. But people would complain, obviously.
So,
but would you see that as a mandate, or like people could still do their own identity stuff with shadow IT stuff, and
if you can prove that you're fulfilling the requirements,
right,
then yes. Right?
Yeah.
So you say, we need to have tokens that are XYZ and this like that and so on and so forth. Right? Those are the requirements. Now, you would be crazy. One of the two options happen, right? You would be crazy not to use to benefit from the work of that team. Or you might say, this is so bad that it makes more sense for me to fulfill those things, to do the same thing from scratch. And if you choose the latter, that's a clear indication that there is something wrong.
Wrong with the enterprise service. Yeah.
Exactly. But you will not discover that there is something wrong.
That's how you will track the success of that team. But in a way, right, the issue we see in the government, right, is first, two pizza team is great, but the fact is each of these teams, could be, effectively growing to the point of becoming massive, and so they could potentially have enough money to build a 10,000 people team, and so they could say, well, the enterprise services are not really meeting my requirement just because it's not doing 1% of the stuff I need. Instead of fixing the 1%, right, they would rebuild the 99. We see this all the time in the government, right? It's also a different beast, right? Because it's not that, the customer is not as well defined as a company, right? There's no revenue, it's a government, right? The government is bureaucrats and not well organized, and we waste a lot of taxpayer money, right? So, for me, it was always like, well, if you have a gap of 5%, you need to find a freaking way to augment the existing enterprise service and fix it instead of rebuilding it.
So let's say I'm going to change just slightly, but I think going in the same direction. Let's say that I need a solution for something. And as an individual, right? And there is an open source project that is not fulfilling 100% of what they need, but what did you say? 95%, right? 5% is missing, right? Now, what are my options? I can build it from scratch. Or I can do those 5% and put it there.
There's another option.
I feel the same thing.
It's going to fork the project. That's what the government is going to freaking fork the open source project.
Yeah,
which
but
would be a disaster.
No. I used open source as an example. Going back to your example, right? There is a team that's doing something about tokens, right? And that is doing 95% of what they need. Heck, I'm not going to build my own solution. I'm going to go to that team and say, okay, I'm missing those 5%. How can I help you with the 5% that I need? And at the same time, make a better solution, because that's easier. I want to do less work. I don't want to do more work.
Yeah, but you see how it's interesting, right? Because you would probably find in the government, 80% of people will have common sense and do what you just said. But 20%, so it's not small. 20% in the government when you have 4 million people is a lot of people. 20% would, because of power, and the more money you have, the more powerful you are, and the more people you have, the more money you have, and so the more work you do, the more powerful. So there's different incentives as an individual, right, that you would not see in a company, right? And
Oh yeah.
that pushes people to make the wrong decision, right? That I've seen it,
I
where literally you ask them why they can't come with a valid reason, right? They're like, oh, there was gaps. Okay, so what were the gaps? Well, there was gaps, so and it's very common, right? So that's why for me there was always few things. So the way I think about it is most services should be, pick and choose and build your own. There's a few that should be like, maybe you have 5, 6 options, for stuff. And then there's a few that's like there's one, and that's identity management. That's like, cyber critical, like logs and, very important stuff
yeah.
that the enterprise, just for cyber reasons, needs to have visibility. What do you think of that kind of somewhat
Of course. I
flexible
mean,
model?
I often speak in a way as if that I think that my own recommendation should be applied 100% of the time. Heck no. The percentage is much smaller, right? I like to
Right.
think in terms like, hey, how would the ideal world look like? We're not gonna
Right.
get there, right? And then there
There's
are all
no
variations.
kumbaya
So,
world.
of course, I mean, hey, if you ask me where should I run my application, I'm gonna say Kubernetes, and then we speak for 15 minutes, and I say, no, maybe mainframe is a better solution, right? Or VMs, or bare
There's
metal,
some
or
stuff that
Java,
still
or
runs on
Python.
mainframe for sure. Yeah.
Exactly. So there are all shades of gray, right? So when I say
Right.
2 pizza team, that's ideal fantasy land I would like to strive
I eat
for,
a lot
right?
of pizza,
And
so for me, I eat a lot of pizza, so maybe it's less people. So
by the way, the pizzas in US are much bigger than in Europe. So I don't know
right,
whether that means that we have smaller teams here.
I know, right? That's a problem already. You already have disparity, right? And then you have people that eat more than less. So you don't want me in the team. You would have less people. So
Yeah.
so I got your point. It makes sense, right? So looking at, obviously, you mentioned, the providers doing their own things, and CSPs, obviously they love to get you locked into their stack, right? Their whole point in life, most of the time, they pretend sometimes to be a little bit flexible, and they do, stuff like EKS anywhere, and Azure DevOps that can run, outside of Azure. But let's face it, it's not. It will be pretty common sense as a business to try to ensure that people are, stuck in your cloud, right? So, what do you see? Do you see cloud providers now maybe getting a little bit more aware of the need of, hybrid and supporting multiple clouds? Do you see that becoming a thing? I mean, you've seen EKS anywhere and stuff like that, right?
I think that is going to be happening much more, especially that I would predict that we will have sprawl of cloud services, right? It's almost as if we are at the early days of internet. I don't know
Right.
who can remember that, but early we had Yahoo and Alta Vista and 2 more things, right? Dominated by a few players. Now we still have in internet big players, but then the field is much wider, right? And I think the same thing will be happening with cloud services of any sort, right? We can see that with Snowflake, right? So big 3 cloud providers, Google, Azure, AWS, will over time need to learn how to play with others. Some are doing that more than others already. And that competition will be forcing them to be more, to look for more common ground or more standard way of doing things, simply because the more services or service providers you're using, the more that will be for you as a user extremely important. If you say, hey, okay, so I use one of the big 3 hyperscalers, and then I use Snowflake, and I use this, and I use that. And now if you are the blocker in making all that work, like if you AWS are a blocker, I'm going to go to Azure, or the other way around, right? So it will be almost forced on the hyperscalers, right? which is how usually some kind of standardization happen, right? We see that with Kubernetes, that Kubernetes in a way is a standardization that, hey, you can create a Kubernetes cluster this way in Google Cloud and that way in AWS, but basically what is happening behind that API is the same in all three, or very, very, very similar.
They try to create now, CL. I mean, you see all these, distros creating a bunch of CLDs and trying to get you locked in. Right? If you lose OpenShift, they're gonna have routes, which is because ingress didn't exist, and then they kept it because it's no, we have to keep it because the ingress didn't exist, and so we needed it, but now we don't need it, but we're gonna keep it just for making sure our existing customers are not impacted. But that's that's a pile of junk. They just wanted to lock you in.
Yeah.
So
look, everybody wants to gain customers, and nobody wants to lose customers. Kind of that's a game of every business.
Yes.
Now the rules of the game are changing over time.
Right.
Like I don't think there is a company who would not want to have customers locked.
That's true. That's true. Well, maybe mine. I don't care. I don't want to get people locked in. But that's me.
Mine as well, but that's why I don't personally have a 1,000 people company, probably.
So, how do you see, I guess, teams reduce their toil in the future? What is it going to take?
I think I will have to go to the previous explanation. Working together through services, right? Because we tried two extremes, right? As industry, I think that we tried having 50 different departments, and then Jira ticket goes from one to another to another to another. That did not really work. That's when we had releases that last for half a year each release, or a year or something like that. Yeah. We tried, you do everything, and that failed as well. That's full stack developer, right?
Too complex now.
Too much to know. Simply,
it's too much.
Separation does not work. Knowing everything does not work, and the only option left is really to work together, but not together. Kind of, hey, whole company is one big multi-thousand people team, right? But by providing services. Hey, I know how to do pipelines. I'm going to give you pipelines as a service, and you can just define this and that, and off you go, right? So if it's internal teams that work towards benefit of others within an organization, they need to become to others the same as what AWS or Google or Azure or Snowflake is for them, right? Same type of operations. I don't do things for it. So same like AWS. You cannot go to AWS and say, dear AWS, you write email, please, I need 3 VMs. You cannot do that, right? You can, AWS created this service, you consume it, you have interface, web interface, UI, CLI, whatever people need, and you consume it, and they make sure that it's running, and you make sure that you request it or create it yourself. Same thing needs to happen between teams, so that they live happily ever after, right? More productive, more scalable, and all the jazz.
That sounds good. I like it. So, when you look at mistakes that you see teams make, what are the big, particularly around platform engineering? What do you see?
The first one is that I do not believe that platform engineers can create a platform, right? Because it would go to the same problem like full stack engineer. Because if you say, my team is going to create a platform from 0 to 100%, that means that you need to know everything you need to know about databases, about cloud, hyperscalers, about Kubernetes, about everything, right? You cannot do that. The way I see platform engineering is more like a glue or facilitator. Okay, I'm going to create a scaffold of how that platform will be exposed to others and so on and so forth. And then I go to you, dear database expert, and tell you how you can plug your experience, your expertise into that platform so that others can consume, right? And you, dear infrastructure person, and so on and so forth, right? So the first mistake is thinking that a person or a team can create a platform alone. Simply,
What if it's an
it
aggregate
defines.
of teams? So, like, platform one was 20 teams of 20 two-pizza teams, but all under the
Oh yeah,
same umbrella of the platform.
yeah. Then we're talking about collaboration. When I said one team, I meant we hire one person or two people, and kind of they're going to
Right.
figure it out. No,
Platform
I
one is
assume that
200 and 250 people.
exactly, and I'm pretty sure that you had different expertise in those teams, right? Somebody
Oh, yeah.
was probably proficient with X, somebody with Y, and somebody with Z, right? So yeah, that's what we need. We need all the experience in different personas to be put
It can't
in
be
one
just
place.
a couple of people. Yeah.
Exactly.
Unless if
Now-
you buy a turnkey platform, I guess, and you're not opinionated and you just buy.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. Again, but I'm always in favor of buying. If something you need is for sale, buy it.
And it's right there ready. Yeah.
It's right there. It's ready. It's going to be cheaper than if you build it because you're sharing the cost, right? Like if I'm going to buy a car, I'm not building a car. I mean, I would like to if that would be my hobby, but for majority of people, you buy a car because it's cheaper than if you build a car. Now, if you say, hey, my car needs to fly, then okay, you need to build it, right? Because all of a sudden your needs are different than what is on the offer.
Right. Makes sense. So, what's next after this, right? What's the next big thing beyond this?
So I'll start with two, right? There will disappearance of Kubernetes. The first big thing. And when I say disappearance, I do not mean that Kubernetes will literally disappear, but it will disappear from.
You won't see it. It's going to be behind the scene.
Exactly. Just like it will have the same fate as hypervisors. Everybody who creates today a virtual machine in any of the providers, including on-prem, is using hypervisors, and vast majority of us do not know that there is such a thing as hypervisor, especially how it works.
Yeah.
So I think that's, and we can see examples of that. Like my favorite example is probably Azure Container Apps, right? Here's a container, an image, run it. It scales, it does a lot of funky stuff. You never see Kubernetes. It's just behind the scenes.
Yeah. That's one.
Now, what I'm curious, given that I'm in that space, like cloud native.
Two things, right?
Exactly.
There was two.
And this is more speculative, that I know it's coming. I just don't know what form will it have yet. I'm curious to see how will artificial intelligence extend into what we're doing, right? Right now, and I'm going to keep using Kubernetes as example, that applies to many other things. You're still not really making choices. It is making permutations within constraints that we give it, right? For every 100 requests,
That's small.
no, there is no intelligence of any form of way, right? I can tell Kubernetes, hey, for every 100 concurrent requests, create a replica, never have less than 2, never more than 10 replicas of my application. Scale up and down, but there is no decision making in Kubernetes in that terms. It just says, okay, what's the number of requests? 107 means 2 replicas, according to the rules that Viktor gave you, right?
Yeah.
I think that we will be moving towards those decisions being more intelligent. Yeah.
So potentially impacting SRE and ops and stuff like that, and even maybe writing the YAML to begin with.
Oh yeah. So except I would say not impacting, enabling. I like that word, right? Because everybody's scared. Oh, will that mean that I lose my job? Oh, now ChatGPT can write code for me. Do I lose? No, you're being enabled. You can do more.
That's the way I sell it. Although there's a debate about that. Some people like to pretend things are not going to happen. Doesn't mean it's going to not happen, right? It's good to keep track of what's going on in the world, because people have a hard awakening when it's too late. So
you either adapt.
That's my next question. Right. You have to adapt, right. And
yeah, you adapt
my next question to you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know whether it will be Jet GPT, right? But technologies like
Something like
GPT, that's a disruption that is already happening, and
I mean,
there
for
is no
my
stopping
company,
it.
GPT wrote 90% of my UI, my backend, 100% of my SQL, all my YAML, right? So it's taking one developer and turning it into probably five. So you can also debate,
Exactly.
would I have hired, marketing people to write the LinkedIn stuff and the posts and the YouTube scripts I write, and all my last 7, 10 YouTube videos were created by the bot, right? My logo was created by the bot, right? I mean, it's just, so I could have hired a designer. I didn't do it, right? So we can pretend it's not going to disrupt, but it is going to disrupt, right? At the very
Oh,
least, it's going to either augment or at least, or at least you're not going to hire the extra person you were going to hire, because now one person can do 5 people's job, right? So either way, it's disrupting. But what do you see specific to the developer world? I'm sure you play with GPT, and what's your take on for specific to developers, right? I see a very good ability to command code and convert into Node to Python and Go, and all that stuff. Regex. I mean, you wouldn't believe the regex I did with GPT. I hate it so much, and it's able to give me the best regex. You know.
I actually, I would, I don't use GPT much. I do use Copilot, which is also based on
Yeah. Which is GPT anyway.
OpenAI.
So you use,
Exactly.
yeah, same one.
And I would say that if for some strange reason a company where I work at would say you're not allowed to use it, I would rather quit the company than stop using it. It became indispensable. I cannot work anymore without, in my case, Copilot.
How much do you feel like it augments your time? How much are you talking? Like 10%? For me, I think it's more like 60 to 80%. But how much do you think it is?
Something like that, probably. Or I think that more than double, because I see
You
myself.
have to write all this stuff from scratch. It's a lot of work.
No, especially since Copilot, at least, I see that how it's advancing over time, and I see how it understands the context of the project. I use
insane.
Visual Studio Code, so
Yeah, me too.
I see it's helping me by removing the mundane work. What in the past would be,
all
hey,
the boring,
if you're writing
the boring stuff, which takes time, takes tremendous time, right?
Exactly, and I can focus more on what matters, because let's face
10%.
it, most of it. Exactly.
Yeah.
My typical example of what does not matter is if you wrote Java in the past or now, writing getter setters. Hey, there is 200 getter setters. We all need to write them, and nobody knows why. I mean, I know why, but kind of
Right.
why do I need to
Not
write
everybody
it?
does. Yeah, and it's also making it widely accessible to everybody, right? So I'm wondering also, like, the impact on effectively anybody can now write stuff. I mean, it was already the case, right? It was, you go on Stack Overflow and you copy and paste stuff and it works more or less, right? Doesn't make you a developer, but it's interesting how it's democratizing maybe access to code, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, I think that those things were happening always, in terms that whatever is our current level right now becomes simplified over time and easy, that anybody can do it.
Right.
But then the requirements become different.
Right. The next stuff.
Right?
Yeah, the next stuff. Yeah, we have to keep up and reinvent yourself, right? Otherwise, you're
exactly. So if your requirements stay the same, then whatever new technology, in this case AI, comes, kind of can completely remove you, right? But what we're doing today as industry is very different from what we were doing 10 years ago or 20 or 30, right? One of the first things.
Unless you're in the government. If you're in the government, you might be stuck in time a little.
So I'm not up to, I don't know exactly how it works. I had very brief engagement with...
stuck in 40, 50 years old systems. That's very common. But, hopefully we don't do that anymore.
There are, I don't know details, but there are also, I work with banks. It cannot be much different.
Right. Yeah, it can be worse. But banks, they have the customers and the they have competitors, right? The government is like, yeah, we're competing against other nations, but we don't really fight, so we don't really see who is winning. So it's very
Yeah,
abstract. If there's a war tomorrow with China, then we'll see who is doing the best tech, right? But until there is a war, it's all maybes. Oh, maybe they have this, maybe they have that. I don't know. Who is it gonna? Is it gonna work? So anyway,
true,
so let's talk
true.
about what's next, right? So your YouTube channel and your podcast. Love for you to share a little bit. I mean, I follow it, but I love for the audience here to know what you first. Let's talk about the YouTube channel.
Oh, the short version is I'm going crazy, meaning that I need to reduce what I'm doing. Every Monday, I publish a video about some subject that I'm interested in. Most of the time, it's new project or technology, sometimes processes. So that's Monday is only me. New thing started every Tuesday that me and Whitney, another girl, are going through all CNCF projects, 200 something of them, grouping them, letting people choose. There is a repository that all the projects work with any combination of projects. It's insanity. Then Wednesday, that's a podcast. Thursday, Ask Me Anything section in YouTube where we have nothing prepared, just people come with random questions and we answer them just ask questions, whatever you want. We answer them, and the valid answer is I have no idea.
Yep.
And Friday is news type of stuff. So there's something every day.
You publish that much? That must be a ton of work. That must be insane.
Yeah, it's insane. Luckily, I like with Friday, I have a Darin co-host, and Wednesday he's doing most of the work. Right. I just appear like I'm a Barbie over there.
You're just a Barbie, yeah. You're just a pretty face.
Exactly, but Monday videos are actually what takes most time because it's not just a show. I spend anything between 2 hours and 3 months with technology.
Too. Right,
exactly.
And you do hands-on stuff, right? So
yeah.
So you're recording, and so are you doing the editing, or you have people to do that?
I was doing the editing until a year and a change ago, and that was just too much time. For the type of video I'm publishing there, it could easily, half an hour or 45 minutes video, easily a full day or more of editing.
Oh, yeah.
So I have an agency now doing that for me.
You have about 60,000 followers, I think, on YouTube or something like that, right?
Something like that, big. Yes.
That's pretty amazing for tech. There's a few big ones. There's not a lot of tech. Of course, people love watching, half-naked dance videos or cats or whatnot. But for tech, we do what we can.
I can do a half-naked dance, but I suspect that would decrease the number of surprises.
No one wants to see it. I don't think anyone wants to see it.
Yeah, exactly. So wouldn't help me.
So last question: what keeps you up at night?
I just work too much, so not much keeps me up at night. I don't sleep much.
Right. How many hours you sleep a day?
On average, probably 5, something like
5? Wow. Holy cow.
Yeah.
That's tough.
But right now it's really trying to figure out what will happen with OpenAI and other similar things. It's a disruption, but it's much easier to see how disruption will play when you're inside it. Like if you ask me what will be the disruption within cloud native or Kubernetes, I would be better able to predict.
Because you're in it, yeah.
You're inside, right? You have inside information or part of it, right? But with AI, it's not my field. So it's very hard for me to figure out. I know it's huge, kind of. I know it's coming. I know it's going to change how we do everything, including software industry. But I don't know yet how. And it's very hard to, 95%, and this is not valid only for AI today, but for all the hype things, vast majority is a noise, right? And now it's
And
bit
people
clearer,
see the
but
negative
it's
things, right? It's always interesting how, for me, I created a company around it because I saw the potential, but most people were so focused at the time on, oh, it's making mistakes, it's wrong. I'm like, yeah, it's 5% wrong, it's 90% right, and you're talking about all the. That's what people do, right? They always criticize. It's just so exhausting. Nobody's happy
that's
anymore.
part of the human nature. That's what humans do, not only to AI but to others humans. It's always spotting
Right,
others' mistakes and not
right,
even realizing how many you are making, right?
right. It's interesting because for me, I was always able to like look at new tech stacks and new innovation and see, particularly in B2B, what the impact of the technology is going to be. Right, I founded 13 companies and 188 products that I sold to 45 Fortune 500, and I just have this capability, I guess, of being able to project, what a product like this could do in retail, banking, healthcare, whatever, right? I picked the government on this one because I knew that everybody was going to rush, right, to help pretty much every market on the planet, education, retail, and I see like there's probably more companies created around GPT per day than there is of anything else right now. It's kind of insane, right? So you want to have something a little bit different, right? And of course, with our background, we also wanted to make sure the government, right, has the best access and rapid access to this, because Beidou in China created the equivalent, and so we don't want to be the one without it. I think everybody understands that you don't want to
Oh
be the
yeah.
one lagging behind. That would be pretty bad, right? So yeah. So
Oh yeah.
how do you last question? How do you keep up? Right? How do you learn yourself? Who do you what do? You go on YouTube channels? How do you need to find so much content for your channel? You must have the trove of information somewhere.
So if you ask me that question like 10 years ago or something like that, I would say, hey, those are the books I read. Currently, those are the videos I watch. Or over time, I move closer and closer to the edge. When I say edge, I don't mean edge computing, but latest and greatest. That none of those things work anymore. So I search for projects, go through the code. Usually there is no yet documentation even, right? So my main source of information is either random projects. I literally search for projects randomly, and then
Randomly.
9 out of 10 goes to trash. And one advantage I have is that I speak in a lot of conferences, and that gives me opportunity to actually, most of us who speak at conferences, we don't go to each other's talks. We just spend
Right.
time in corridors, and then I'm surrounded from people
Right.
doing cool,
Romantic
innovative
stuff.
things. So it's
Right.
inside information, chit chat, usually after a drink or two.
That's a good idea. And are you following any channel, any YouTube channel that you find interesting, that you watch?
Not much really. Mostly because again, I get most of the information directly from people. So I'm pretty sure that a bunch of people who I meet all the time in chat, they have YouTube channels, and I don't even know that they do.
Shame on you.
Which ones I do know and admire. Brett Fisher is absolutely great.
Yeah.
And raw code. So if you would ask me, give me two: Brett Fisher, raw code.
Well, I cheat because I follow you and you do all that stuff, so that way I don't have to do it, right? So that's even easier, right?
That's the trick always. Everybody kind of like, you find your niche, what you really do, and then figure out how to get everything else
You
from
go
others.
talk to conferences. I hate conferences, so I only go when I'm paid a lot of money. So you go to conferences, and then I'll listen to you, and then I can tell people. That's how this works.
There you go. That's a pattern.
The chain of information. Well, wanted to tell you thank you, right, for your time and all the information you gave us today. This was so exciting to have you. I always give the guests the last words. So we love to for you to give us the parting words. And obviously people can follow you. I have all the links here on the bottom of the screen. But over to you for the last words.
I just like helping people. So one of the things I didn't mention, but I should, I have an open calendar policy. If you just ping me on Twitter or LinkedIn, you'll find me easily. You have a problem, I can help, or question or anything, just ping me and I'll do my best.
All right, here we go. So next week, next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, as always, we're going to have Dan Lawrence from the Chain God CEO, and he's the founder of Sixto and Minikube and Distroless at former Google. Great innovator. So it's going to be fun. Maybe not as fun as you, but that's okay. We'll take the second best. And with that, everybody, keep up the great work, and let's make sure our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.